Greetings, everybody. StephenGray here, and you've probably noticed you're watching this on StephenGray Vision YouTube channel, or you might be listening to it on Anchor.fm or some of its spin-offs. And the sole purpose of doing these interviews with leading figures in psychedelics and consciousness transformation work is to promote the healing and awakening of humanity, especially, well, always important, of course, in the history of this planet, but arguably more than ever now as we face extreme crises on this planet. And one might say the karma has come home to roost, so to speak, and we need to, the days of the flatland times are over, you might say. So in that regard, it's a cliche to say honored, but I really am honored to have William Richards with me today. And that is because not only does he seem to be a wonderful fellow, you'd have to check with his wife on that one, but sorry for the lightheartedness there, Bill, but anyway, he seems to be a very kind and friendly person, but much more important than that, really, I suppose, is that he has been one of the groundbreaking figures in psychedelics work going back to the early 1960s. And so here's a brief kind of bio of Bill. He's a psychologist in the Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research in Baltimore, Maryland. Has been implementing research studies with psilocybin within the psychiatric department of the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine since 1999. And I can't resist a little corrective here for people. So many people say John Hopkins as if John is the first name, but the actual name of that university and School of Medicine is Johns Hopkins. He is also associated with the program in psychedelic therapies and research at the California Institute of Integral Studies, that's CIIS, and psychedelic research with sunstone therapies at the Aquilino Cancer Center in Rockville, Maryland. Bill's graduate degrees include a Master of Divinity at Yale, an STM, which, if it matters, Bill, you're going to have to tell me what that is, because I don't know what an STM is, in the Psychology of Religion at Andover Newton, and a PhD from Catholic University. He studied with Abraham Maslow, the legendary Abraham Maslow, at Brandeis University with Hans Carl Lenoir, pardon me if I don't get the name right, at George August University in Göttingen, Germany, where his involvement with psychedelic research originated in 1963. From 1967 to 77, he implemented projects of psychotherapy research with LSD, DPT, MDA, and psilocybin at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, including protocols designed to investigate the promise of psychedelics in the treatment of alcoholism, depression, narcotic addiction, and the psychological distress associated with terminal cancer, and also their use in the training of religious and mental health professionals. His recent research at Johns Hopkins has focused on the potential value of psilocybin in the continuing education of professional religious leaders from different world religions. His book, Sacred Knowledge, Psychedelics and Religious Experiences, has been released by Columbia University Press and now translated into 6 additional languages. And before we get going here, I just want to mention that I've read this book more than once, and it's an excellent book. I love the subtitle, Psychedelics and Religious Experience, really puts a context on it. So welcome, Bill, and thanks a lot for joining me.
Well, it really is an honor to be with you. I can hardly wait to see what all we're going to talk about.
Right. Well, you're going to do most of the talking.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to feed you a few questions, and you can go on as long as you want in answering those questions. So here's one that might be a good starting place, since you have such a long and colorful history with these medicines or sacraments. So what drew you toward this work in the first place?
Well, briefly, once upon a time, I was a graduate student at the University of Göttingen in Germany. Actually went there to study theology. And in the just around the corner from the dorm where I was living, was the nerve clinic or psychiatric clinic of the university. And our psychiatrist there, Hans-Karl Leuner, was doing research with some new drug and looking for volunteers. Two of my friends volunteered. One experienced himself sitting in his father's lap. His father had died during World War II, and it was very meaningful and healing for him. And the other one saw visions of SS men marching in the streets. And I thought, gee, I've never seen anything like that. It sounds like fun. And so I went over and asked if I could apply, and they asked me if I got drunk very often. I didn't. If I was in good health, and led me to a little basement room and gave me an injection of this drug called psilocybin. And what can I say? I've never been quite the same since. I had an incredibly profound experience that I did not even know was possible. I was expecting to get some insights into my early childhood, and instead I essentially had a glimpse of what the Hindus would call moksha. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I had not even heard the word psychedelic or psilocybin. And the importance of set and setting had not yet been recognized. That's why I was just given the drug and left alone. The only music during the session was the emptying of the hospital garbage cans outside of my window, which I perceived as kind of tinkling temple bells. But anyway, I became known as that interesting American student who had the mystical experience, you know? And why I had such a positive experience is a long, debatable story. But anyway, it did happen, and really focused and launched the rest of my career in the psychology of religion and clinical psychology. Mm-hmm. So I've been doing psychedelic research whenever I could ever since.
Mm-hmm. Great. So you may have partially answered a question I want to ask you that might follow out of that. It could go any way you want to take it. Basically, you just pointed out that your first experience gave you a glimpse of sort of what you might call unconditional reality or divine reality, and that is reason enough, clearly, for these substances to be introduced to more people in careful ways. But to take it a little further, perhaps, can you elaborate on why you think these, because you're still working with them now, why are they so important? What is their, let me ask it this way. What is their, let's even say, potential role that hasn't even been fully realized yet in society?
As I outline in my book, I feel like they have profound promise in medicine, in education, and in religion. Okay, most of my career has focused on their use in medicine, in treating addictions and depression and the anxiety people often experience near the end of life. And I think they're opening up a whole new dimension of effectiveness and beauty and meaning in the field of psychiatry. It's a fascinating frontier we're on there, just medically seen. And we're working with the FDA and doing the research required to get psilocybin rescheduled in the United States to come off of Schedule 1, allegedly drugs that have nothing to contribute and are dangerous and destructive, which really does not apply to the psychedelics when they're responsibly and competently administered. So we're working through medicine to get the drugs legal and integrated wisely into Western culture.
Right. So that begs a couple of questions in my mind, related questions. One, and so I'm assuming that some of the people who watch or listen to this interview are going to be what you might call lay people from the psychedelic community, if there is such a thing, loosely defined. And among those people, I don't know what the percentage would be. There will be people who are doubtful or suspicious about over medicalization, so to speak, or the medical establishment, I guess you could say, controlling the dispensation and use of these overly much. Can you comment on that concern?
Sure. I see, two trajectories, if you will. One, integrating them into medical care. And that's where I've been putting most of my efforts. I don't think that rules out the freedom to use them by so-called healthy people. My only concern is that they learn how to use them wisely. So there's not a lot of harm done and people rushing into emergency rooms in paranoid states just because they don't know how to approach these drugs responsibly and intelligently. But they're both legitimate. Their use in religion goes back to at least 5,500 BC. It's nothing new. And they arise in cultures and get suppressed and arise and get suppressed, very much like mushrooms. And right now they're arising. And my hope is that we can be evolved enough to sanely and carefully and responsibly integrate them into our societies in really constructive ways. And I think we can. As far as the medical route, there are many suffering people, and often rather poor people, rather poorly educated people sometimes, but people who don't have tie-dye T-shirts and can't spell psychedelic, okay? And they're suffering. And the way I think they're going to be helped through medicine is for this to be established as a legitimate medical therapy, for health insurance, Medicare in the United States to cover the treatment so that people who don't have a lot of money can have access to this, in a completely safe and legal way. So my personal effort has been to support the medical use and through the California Institute of Integral Studies to train therapists and researchers to work on that frontier. For example, if psilocybin becomes legal and integrated into palliative care, and a few years from now, many, if not most, of the oncology centers will want to offer psychedelic therapy with psilocybin. We need a small army of competent therapists to do that. And where are they going to come from? There aren't enough psychiatrists to do it. So it's mental health people of all different flavors, perhaps chaplains and pastoral counselors, people we can train to work responsibly with the psychedelics as a medical intervention.
You make
And
a you've just made an excellent case. Thank you, Bill.
yeah,
That's a vision that excites me, actually.
yeah.
It's such a sensible thing, you know. Yeah. So this is a little bit of an outlier question, but in relation to that, but it is relevant to what you're talking about. And I just wonder if you have a thought about this. Uh, I read an account from an ayahuasca shaman from Peru who was at a conference, like a medical conference of some kind in Lima, that involved a lot of non-native people as well. And he said something like, "We don't have, or we have a lot of respect for Western medicine, but we also know that it's only half of the picture or the work. The other half is the connection to the spirit of the plant. And well, I know, LSD, for example, doesn't, because it's not exactly a plant, of course, doesn't necessarily have a spirit per se. But does that, what do you think of that? That idea that, that the connecting with the spirit of the plant is what evokes much of the power of the healing.
Well, this is a sensitive area, and I feel
Hmm.
I need to choose my words carefully because I don't want to be misunderstood.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, I guess I think there are different languages, different traditions of talking about how to approach psychedelics, how to use them wisely, how to learn from them. Um, I love the ayahuasca tradition of going in. When you take it, you go in for a lesson from the teacher, you know?
Hmm.
Uh, I think there's stereotypes projected in both directions between these two communities, if you will. And I think they're both really stereotypes because many of the shamans, they're not primitive witch doctors. Many of them may well have medical degrees, or they have a lineage. They're members of the 21st century living in the countries that allow it, and they're in touch with the long religious traditions and the ways and the ceremonies and the Icaros hymns or whatever, which is beautiful and wonderful. And I honor that community. But on the other side, the medical research community, at least today, is not a cold, white coded group,
Hmm.
Uh, it, the psilocybin or LSD is always given with great care, with preparation, with support, with well-designed environment, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a very loving, almost sacred container in which the drug is administered.
Hmm.
And for people who haven't seen our lab at Hopkins, for example, they may picture something very different. I think there's this individual trust, the social dimension of support, the intention to learn and grow spiritually and psychologically that's really in common with both groups. I think I would argue that it's what really counts isn't the plant, it's the molecule. And I can tell you from my experience that the molecule of psilocybin, say, synthesized in a laboratory, born in a test tube, if you will,
Hmm.
is profoundly sacred stuff.
Hmm.
What it does is transformative, sacred, beautiful. And yeah, it was born uh, in a test tube, kind of created by a scientist mixing different chemicals together. Uh, but I don't think it's any less sacred than the natural plant. I could be wrong. Some of the natural plants have some additional chemicals in them, like baeocystin and norbaeocystin in the mushrooms, for example, that might augment, change a little, the response. I don't know. There are some concoctions that may just promote the amount of nausea experienced or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
But as you mentioned, LSD is born in a test tube and is certainly profoundly sacred in the realms that it opens up, or potentially sacred. Not every experience is sacred,
Yeah, no kidding.
And similar, we have mushrooms, we have the peyote cactus, we have the DMT toad, that all seem to exude or contain similar molecules, and for example, we're often concerned about the shortage of peyote plants, and with honoring the Indians, perhaps we should stop raiding the desert of peyote plants. But a good chemist can make mescaline in a test tube that, as far as we can tell, is every bit as potent as the peyote,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, what's his name? Aldous Huxley? No, which, was it Aldous Huxley that wrote The Doors of Perception?
Yes.
Yeah, and he used mescaline for those profound, spiritual experiences.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, those profound experiences happen spontaneously for some people.
Mm-hmm.
Take my mentor, Abraham Maslow. He never took a psychedelic.
Yeah.
He didn't need to. He was a natural Jewish mystic. He could lie down in his backyard in the sunlight and have a mystical experience every now and then. Well, how do we explain that? We know that all of our bodies do create dimethyltryptamine. We're all in violation of federal law by being human. And though it's often argued that the amount is very small, so it can't be all that important.
Yeah.
But maybe, I don't know what the biochemistry is, but people do have profoundly revelatory experiences with no drug at all, in meditation, with sensory overload, with sensory deprivation, in natural childbirth, in athletic feats, in creative performance sometimes,
Sexual ecstasy.
Yes, very exceptional sexual experiences. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there's a common biochemistry happening. I don't know. The biochemistry of what's happening in our minds right now is mighty mysterious, not to mention what's going on during a psychedelic session, The whole mystery of consciousness and the relation of consciousness to the brain and so on is a huge frontier that we're just crawling out of the primeval mud and trying to understand it,
Yeah, well, beautifully put. And also, I just want to say before I move on to some other related questions that this is one of the reasons I think it's so important for people to hear from you, is because you are inside that world where that careful set and setting is being done. And this is not something that a lot of the people in the, well, not exactly quite tie-dye anymore, but, the sort of more layperson psychedelic community are not aware of that work and may have biases against it that are unfounded, as you say, stereotypes. So thank you for that. And
Well, I
so,
think the ignorance goes in both directions.
yeah, no doubt. Well,
Things you haven't been exposed to, you haven't experienced the care and the rituals. But I would just, as I mentioned, that even the medical world has its rituals.
indeed, yeah, yeah.
In fact, we have a rose on the coffee table for every session. And I often think that's how religions get started. We're developing our own uh, traditions, even within the world of medical research.
Yeah, it's a remarkable time that way, I would say. Yeah, Ralph Metzner's book, Teo Nanacatl, talks about because we don't have a lineage, a very accessible lineage of ceremonial use of psilocybin, that he counsels people to very carefully create hybrid ceremonies based
It's,
on their other experiences accumulated over the years with other traditions, etc., etc. But I want to keep moving because we do have a little shorter time than I usually have for these. And one of the things that you just mentioned was, the mystery of consciousness that we're just beginning to understand. And when we talk about biases, stereotypes, and some level of ignorance from either side of whatever those two dichotomies are. This is maybe a different dichotomy. It's addressed briefly in your book, and it's the difference, or maybe you could almost say war between the perennialist and the constructivist perspectives. Could you elaborate on that? And actually, the sort of follow-up question would be, how's that debate coming? Like, yeah, where you and
oh,
I'm pretty sure I know where you and I stand on this one.
well, it's kind of I'm not a professor in a department of religious studies at this point, so I'm not participating in the debate. Um, for those who aren't familiar with this literature, the perennialist idea is that there is a common state of consciousness deep within every human mind, regardless of culture, whether atheist, agnostic, Baptist, Hindu, Islam, Jewish, you name it, that within the depth of the mind, there is a common unitive revelatory place, if you will. There is one God who, in the words of Paul Tillich, is the really real God. Really separate from all our traditions and our languages and rituals and so on. And that the mystics of all the world religions have kind of rediscovered or tuned into that, or experienced the death and rebirth of their egos, and are left with that awestruck memory, if you will, of this unitive state. And we call them the perennialists, okay? Aldous Huxley wrote a book, The Perennial Philosophy.
Right.
It's essentially the Platonic philosophy being rediscovered over and over and over in the history of religion, okay? And there's words for that state of consciousness in every religious tradition, the beatific vision in Christianity and so on, moksha in Hinduism and so on. Now, the constructionists, constructiveness?
I think it's constructivist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Constructivist, yeah. Yeah.
I see them as a bunch of academics that have to write books and have to use a lot of words and have to lecture. And they're looking for distinctions, uniquenesses, as opposed to the ineffable one that you can't put into language, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And their stress is on how religious experiences are influenced by our expectations and the suggestions in our cultures, by what your mother taught you, etc. And there's no question there's some truth in that, at least in the language we use
Yeah.
to speak about religious experiences. But the extreme constructivists would say there is no perennial philosophy. All we have is what we generate in our own fantasies from our childhood and early adult experiences. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that psychedelic work really offers strong evidence for the constructionist or for the perennialist approach.
Indeed.
Okay?
Yeah.
Indeed, because people of all different religious backgrounds and even good, honest agnostics, skeptics, report the same basic vision. And it's very hard to put into words. But it's in the scientific community, we call it mystical consciousness. And believe it or not, that's becoming a scientific term. You can find it in the Journal of Psychopharmacology. Okay. And it's a state of consciousness characterized by unity, transcendence of time and space, intuitive knowledge, a deeply felt positive mood, sacredness, awesomeness, and claims of ineffability and paradox afterwards. It's very hard to put into language. I died but was never so alive. God was one, but he contained everything that is, and so on, you know? I think we have very strong evidence to support the perennialist approach right now.
Excellent. Yeah. In our precious, somewhat limited time, I would like to lead you toward a bit more of the sort of directly applicable kind of information, like the work that you have been associated with and been around and seen and participated in these kind of careful therapeutic environments. How would you describe the set and setting? Like, what makes an optimal set and setting in that kind of work? Maybe even more setting than set, I suppose.
Well, they're both important. You know, the set is simply a safe, confidential, reasonably aesthetically pleasing environment where you feel comfortable and can relax, you know. Set is your intention that I'm willing to learn, even if it involves some suffering, you know. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to trust the person I'm with, my guide, my therapist, and the relationship has developed enough that I can genuinely choose to trust this person and this whole procedure, the right dose of a pure substance in a confidential, safe place. I can really be myself and allow myself to experience whatever emerges. I don't have to censor it, you know, or try to make something happen or avoid something, you know. I can just honestly dive into the pool, if you will, when I don't know the depth or the temperature of the water. I feel secure enough, safe enough to allow that to happen. If we don't establish that quality of trust, we don't administer the psychedelic, okay?
That presumes some pre-session sessions, so to speak.
Yeah. So there's always at least 4 hours, and ideally as many as 8 hours of relationship building before the drug is administered.
And after?
Pardon?
And afterward?
Yeah, and the same afterwards to integrate and apply, digest, if you will, the insights that occur during the session. as we often say, it's very easy to love all mankind. Uh, Loving your boss is something different.
Indeed, yeah.
And you have to
Yeah.
come back to work,
Yeah.
back to earth, and start to integrate these insights.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, that's another question that I hope to get to in our time here, but I want to follow up a little bit more in this line of thinking. So you've talked about, and it's well known that there's two sort of general loose descriptions of the kind of psychotherapy that one might, or psychedelic therapy that one might do. One is psycholytic and one is psychedelic therapy, both using the same kinds of substances, but dosage being the key difference there, obviously. So maybe you could say a little bit about, for people who maybe are not familiar with the difference, what that is, and then when it's more appropriate to, well, what kind of dosages are more appropriate for what kind of situations, I guess you could say.
Yeah, both approaches are incredibly valuable. The psycholytic uses lower dosage, typically less than would be required for a mystical, transcendental type of experience. So the content of the session tends to focus on your development, your interpersonal relationships, your psychological conflicts, the stuff that makes up most ordinary psychotherapy. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's a very worthwhile area to explore. The psychedelic, higher dosage, in addition to that, or sometimes instead of that, opens up these universal states of consciousness of gods and goddesses and precious stones and ancient civilizations, and then sometimes this mystical unitive awareness. They're both valuable. And sometimes people if the dose is high enough, in their very first session will have a transcendental experience. And then, if you will, on the way back to Earth or in subsequent sessions, will work on their personal psychodynamic issues. And other people kind of seem to need to work through their personal issues almost like a ladder before the gates of the heavens open up for them. Okay.
Hence the importance of having a number of sessions before actually administering a medicine, right?
Yeah, that's right. And
yeah.
both are good. In the treatment of addictions, where there's a lot of typically low self-worth, feelings of failure, disappointment. I've lost jobs, I've lost relationships. My view of myself is very poor, okay? For a person like that to be able to tap into a mystical state where there's a sense of beauty and creativity and inner resources and unconditional love, okay? It changes the person's self-concept, And then it's easier to talk to those relatives you've offended in the past, But it works well both ways.
Yeah. Again, a similar line of exploration here. Could you say a little bit about the kind of best practice or optimal role and responsibilities of the therapist or guide in the kind of work you've been associated with?
Well, the therapist has to be a very competent therapist, has to understand his or her own needs and not exploit the situation in any way. There's regrettable lapses of good ethics in the psychedelic community, both in the plant-based world and in the research world, that we don't want to happen in the future. But whatever makes for effective therapy, honesty, genuineness, being present, really being in the present moment together, really caring about the patient you're working with, you know? You're not just giving a drug to see what will happen.
Mm-hmm.
You're really in the world beside that person, okay? And in that healthy therapeutic relationship, the mind of the patient or research volunteer or whoever it is manifests an incredible wise choreography of content, if you will, that people experience what they need to experience at the growing edge of their personal and spiritual development. It has nothing to do with the drug or the dose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really quite incredible. But people have to know how to navigate in that inner world. You know, and that can be taught in the preparation. If you see something scary or threatening, what do you do? Well, the instinct is to run away from it, right? Try to be in control. And if you do that, you will reliably experience panic and paranoia. It's like a nightmare. You're running away from your own shadow. And the faster you run, the smaller you are and the bigger the monster becomes, okay? No, you don't do that in psychedelic therapy. If there's something scary, you dig in your heels and you look it straight in the eye or go towards it and you say, well, hello, are you ever big and scary? What are you doing in my mind? What are you made up of? What can I learn from you? And you approach it, and there's insight and resolution, and you go on to new things.
I
As expressed in the ayahuasca tradition, if you see the big anaconda serpent, what do? You dive into his mouth and look out through his eyes. You become the serpent, the Shakti, the Kundalini, the Elan Vital that's within you. If you run from it, you're just going to get scared. Okay.
So, would you say that the guide or therapist pretty much has to have had full-on ego death experiences themselves to be able to negotiate or to help with that high dosage work?
That would be ideal experiential education and training.
Mm-hmm.
And we hope to be able to implement that in the not too distant future. Right now, the realities are that, well, we haven't really tried to get permission to give the psychedelics to our own staff at Hopkins, for example.
Oh. Mm.
You know, the medical community would want to evaluate that very carefully. You know,
Yeah.
it's a very different climate now than in the 1960s, where when we hired a new person, they got 2 LSD sessions as part of their on-the-job training, and they got paid for it. And we reported it dutifully to the FDA, and there was no controversy whatsoever, you know?
Mm-hmm. Boy,
But it's a different world in academia right now, and you have to explore that possibility very sensitively, you know?
yes.
But what we do tell our research volunteers is that all of our therapists have experienced some alternative states of consciousness. How they've done it is their own private business, you know, whether it's meditation or psychedelics. And if it's psychedelics, whether it's been legal or illegal, you know, that's kind of their private lives. But all of our therapists are not intimidated by radically different states. They don't fear that people are going psychotic. They don't wonder where the rescue medications are. They're able to be with people in these radically altered state.
Okay, excellent. Yeah.
And that's where we are at this point in time.
I have so many more questions. There's no way we're going to get through them in our limited time today. I might have to ask you at some
You
point
might
if I
have to
can.
do part two, Stephen.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. So maybe this should be the last question, given that, given our time constraints today, in line with what we've just been talking about. How, I could quote more or less Houston Smith talking about the importance of altered traits versus altered states, and also his comment more or less like this, that psychedelics, we know they can produce religious or spiritual experiences, but it's less certain they can produce religious lives. So my question about that would be, in a loose sense, a general sense, what would you say are the best attitudes, practices, etc., for the individual to turn altered states into altered, long-lasting, life-lasting altered traits?
Yeah. Well, there are many different experiences and many different people.
Mm-hmm.
And St. Paul on the road to Damascus didn't need a second experience. One was quite enough, but other people may experience insights that kind of sit there as intriguing memories. And do they want to do the work of applying them, living out of them? And I think we need community. We need support. We need to know people who respect what we've experienced and don't just think we're flaky or crazy, but know that this is the road of the mystics through the ages. And I'm tempted to say we need institutions that provide support and integration.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, actually, we have them. They're called churches and synagogues and mosques.
Mm.
If they could simply awaken to the potential of immediate revelatory experiences here and now in the present that are occurring in the minds of many people.
Oh, yes, I agree with that. They have all the best buildings.
Yeah, they do.
and
Everything, good music,
yeah, and they're losing, whatever you call them, participants these days. So bringing that back. So yeah, if you're up for it, really would like to have a follow up here, because I think I only got through about half of the kinds of questions that I would like to have asked you today. And I'll just mention again then this excellent book, 2016 I think, wasn't it, when you published this book?
Yes.
Yeah, Sacred Knowledge. And I'm not saying this because Bill's here or because I get a cut from the sales or anything silly like that. I'm saying this because this is I really believe an excellent book, very deeply and thoroughly and kindly considered book. So I'd recommend that. And Bill, just really briefly, is there anything else you'd like people to check out? I can put a little tile under the screen, like for a website or anything like that.
Well, if you want to read about scholarly research, you go to hopkinspsychedelic.org. And there's all kinds of resources and professional publications with lots of statistics and all that sort of stuff that you can study. There's a lot of videos on YouTube and similar sites, that provide more and more information about this frontier. My own efforts are focused at AquilinoCancerCenter.com and SunstoneTherapies.com for people interested in the application of psychedelic therapy at the end of life to help people live fully until they die can change the way we approach death. That might be a topic for another meeting together.
Lovely. I will put little slide-in tiles underneath the screen for that, and so hopefully people will check out some of those. And I know you got to go, so I'm going to say thank you very much for sharing your long accumulated wisdom and insights.
As we say, namaste. I honor the divine within you, Stephen.